Hey everybody, it's me. So wanted to do kind of like a not spit take reaction, but a thought piece on the news that the original cover artwork for New Mutants '98 is set to go on auction with either a buy it now or a starting bid of $7.5 million. Now, the conversation or the topic that I'm going to talk about isn't whether or not I like the book, whether or not I like the art, whether or not I like the artist, even whether or not that price is reasonable, feasible, or realistic, right? The conversation here turns into the proverbial, if this person succeeds at this level, then it helps everybody else beneath them, right? The trickle-down economics theory that a certain president started in the 1980s and has never come to fruition because, as we know, trickle-down economics, by the time it trickles down to those at the bottom, it's pennies, it's crumbs, right? It's not about serving the people at the bottom. Trickle-down economics doesn't help the middle class, and it doesn't help the working poor, and it doesn't help the poor. So the concept that New Mutants '98 original cover artwork could feasibly sell for $7.5 million doesn't benefit me, and it doesn't benefit other independent comic book artists the way that everybody is trying to project that it's going to. And here's the reason. I wouldn't suddenly be able to start selling original pages or original covers for hundreds or even thousands of dollars, because the point that's being made by a lot of professionals, bigger name professionals, I don't want to call them out because some people might see them as being 100% correct. Other people might hear this and say, yeah, that person's absolutely wrong and should be taken down a peg. I don't want them to be taken down a peg. What I want them to do is really, really think about the words that they're using and the thought process that they're using. These individuals are pretty well into the comic book industry, right? They're pretty secure with their careers. They're not hurt by this. If anything, they're going to be benefited a little bit. I've heard a lot of people in the past, like Joe Jusko and a couple of other painters and cover artists, remark that they wish they had kept their artwork that is now selling for tens of thousands of dollars. That there are some programs that are being started to be able to give money back to the artists who drew pages, who drew covers, when that art sells at auction. Now, Rob Liefeld sold the cover to New Mutants '98 some years ago. This isn't his auction. This is somebody who owns the piece trying to benefit off the popularity of the character because of the new movie, right? This isn't somebody trying to do something for art, right? They're not trying to raise awareness for art. They're not supporting independent artists. They're not putting money into the pockets or into the bank accounts of starving artists. If this piece sells for $7.5 million, it benefits the person who sold the piece. It's not going to benefit the person who buys the piece other than they can say they own it, right? This is one of those dubious scenarios where we're coming along to the idea that now significant art pieces, significant comic book art pieces are going to be able to sell for premiums, and that those individuals who have those pieces, covers, splash pages, things like that, are going to be able to benefit from it. There's a huge problem with that. The key phrase in there is significant art pieces. As significant as the Bubba Patrol is to me, and, the number of people who have read it, Is somebody suddenly going to offer me $10,000 for one of the covers to the Bubba Patrol? Are they going to offer me $3,000 for one of the original pages to issues 1 or 2 because everything else is digital? Probably not. Now, some of these artists who are saying a rising tide lifts all ships. That's a great soundbite, right? Because that's physics, and physics doesn't apply to doesn't apply to how finances and how economics applies, right? Physics is physics. Physics exists whether we want it to or not, right? Economics and capitalism exist in a vacuum and are created and spent and decided upon by those who have power. Somebody who has power can't suddenly rewrite how physics works or how weather works. You know, buoyancy. Those are things that can't be changed because somebody has a fat pocketbook. So this concept that if this cover sells for $7.5 million or $7 million or even $5 million, that this somehow benefits everybody below that. Believe me, that's not true. Because in order for any of those statements to say this is going to benefit everybody, somebody all the way at the bottom has to automatically benefit from this. And you would have to think, for this to work, speculators, purely speculators, not collectors, not fans, not people with just a couple of bucks to be able to spend on some original artwork, production artwork, or commissions, is going to be walking down Artist's Alley at your local comic book convention or even San Diego Comic-Con and see an independent artist. And I'm talking independent. I'm talking me. I'm talking some of the other people here in Tucson or in Phoenix, people who haven't been published by Marvel or DC, people who don't have anything through Image, who've never done anything through like Dynamite or Boom or Dark Horse, who don't have that name value, aren't suddenly going to be selling pieces of artwork for $10,000 and $20,000 and $30,000. I understand that, and I'm sure most of the other people who are down here with me, I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I'm saying that as I don't have name value in the comic book community the way Rob Liefeld does, or Joe Jusko does, or Jim Lee does, or Amanda Connor does. Those are names that have been in the industry for decades. Granted, I've been doing this for 18 years, right? But I've still never worked for Marvel, never worked for DC. I've never gotten in anywhere. I've decided that's not really what I want to do. Now, I do eventually want to submit the Bubba Patrol 2 become published by a creator-owned publishing company, right? And at the same time, that's still not suddenly going to make my artwork worth tens of thousands of dollars. It's not going to put me in a bigger house or pay off all my debt. It's not going to suddenly get me a job working for Marvel or DC doing covers or layouts or anything like that. I'm not suddenly going to become spotlighted because a significant piece of comic book artwork has now sold at an auction for millions of dollars. Here's the thing, guys, and again, that cover, yeah, it's iconic. How I feel about it doesn't really matter. It has a place in history. Why? Because it has a character on it that is now front and center. How I feel about that artwork or that creator or that character, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you know, is insignificant to the conversation here. There are much more significant pieces of artwork done by creators who have created universes, right? Guys like Kirby and Eisner, Otomo, Katsuhiro Otomo, probably Miyazaki, that have not and will not sell for millions of dollars a piece. Those creators are in fact legends. Those creators made universes. And if their pieces aren't selling for millions upon millions of dollars, and this one piece is, then that tells you everything you need to know about what this means. And it doesn't mean anything for the creators below that. This helps the top 1% of the 1%, not really even in the comic book community, because all the really iconic pieces of artwork have already been created, right? And you've seen them because they're iconic, because they're out there, because they have been published and republished and homaged again. ASM 300, ASM 129, Giant Size X-Men #1, Spider-Man 1. All these covers that are so iconic probably never sold for this value. Eisner, Otomo, Miyazaki, Kirby, their pieces didn't sell for that, and a lot of those pieces can't be found now. So the argument that these individuals are having, or the debate that these individuals are having and saying, you're just haters because you don't want to see somebody succeed. Well, comic book artists aren't succeeding here if this sells for this, because the comic book artist who created this doesn't own the piece. He's not the one selling it. It's somebody who bought it and somebody who now owns it who would potentially be making that money. Not Rob Liefeld, not the comic book community. I've often said this, and this is a different argument, but it does lend itself here as well. People are talking about how comics are now mainstream because of all the movies and the billions of dollars that they've made and all the merchandising and the toys and everything. And to me, I'm in the thick of it, right? Like, granted, again, who am I? I'm not being published by Marvel or DC. I'm not making $10,000 and $50,000 on my Kickstarters and stuff like that, right? But I know comic books will never be respected the way that people just on the periphery see it. And they're like, well, we've got all these great movies and we've got all these things. And I was just like, the money is what is respected, right? You get those little thank yous at the end of the movies and stuff like that, where, it acknowledges the people who contributed towards the characters and the stories that were portrayed in this movie or this TV show or what have you. That's just kind of like a lifetime achievement award. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't, I don't believe they're giving these individuals residuals for the billions that these movies might be making. They don't retain any of the rights, certainly, because it's Marvel and DC. These are all work for hire. And the concept is the only thing that is respected about this are those numbers, right? It's just the money that is respected. It's still a comic book. It's still something that's sold in a niche store that are disappearing by the day. Something that a bunch of 30, 40-year-olds back in the early 90s tried to invest in and bought way too much into. And then those books are no longer worth the paper that they're printed on because they were printed in the millions. And arguably not the greatest comic books out there, right? So they became worthless in the sense that they're not worth money, but they're worth something to somebody because somebody reads those books and loves them and loves those characters. But the outside world still sees it as niche. You're not going to see just general people showing up to Comic-Con, right? they're probably showing up and going to the guests, maybe to their favorite artists if they know that they worked on a specific character or whatnot. But they are not necessarily going up and down Artist Alley and finding 10 or 20 new creators that they didn't know about, that they saw their banner, they went in, they looked at their artwork, their books, they picked things up, they commissioned artwork, and they not just made that show for somebody, but maybe made that person's year, because now that person feels secure enough that they can keep going and they feel really good about their abilities. Somebody else's artwork that has existed for like 35 years doesn't, do much for me. If it sells for millions of dollars, I don't get anything out of that. I don't gain respect because that artwork sold for that, because somebody might be like, oh yeah, you said you work on comic books. Have you ever worked on that? And I'll be like, no, I do my own stuff. I do the Bubba Patrol. Oh, well, what's that? Like, is it Deadpool? No, it's not Deadpool. Does it say Deadpool? Is it X-Men? No, it's not X-Men. That's the concept that I'm trying to breach here, or broach here, is that just because one piece gets a big significant boost doesn't mean it's going to boost everybody. It won't. It can't. That's not how the economy works. That's not how one comic book sale works. Somebody buys Action Comics #1 for $2 million, right? Which is probably about what it's worth. That doesn't suddenly boost everything else that's ever been made. You don't suddenly see a surge in sales of anything else because that one book suddenly sold for $2 million, right? That's just not the way it works. And I know a lot of people say, well, there are all these people who have a lot of money and they like to spend money on frivolous things like art. I don't look at art as a frivolous thing because I create it myself. I watch, content on YouTube. I watch movies. I watch anime. Listen to music. So art is all around me, and I recognize that. But that doesn't suddenly mean that these people who are at the indie level are suddenly going to become, millionaires. It's not going to happen. It'd be awesome. It'd be great. But it's not going to happen, and it can't happen because not everybody can be elevated like that. That's just not the way the world works. It never works that way. When soccer or when football gets really big because the women's team does insanely great in the World Cup and the Olympics and all these other things, independent women's clubs around the United States or independent football clubs around the United States don't suddenly start seeing a plethora of fans showing up and an influx of cash coming in or awards being thrown at them or endorsements or anything like that. That's just not how it works. So we have to be very, very realistic about this. Yeah, that would be kind of cool, right? Why wouldn't it be cool to be part of an industry that has a piece of art that is that significant that it's sold for that amount of money? This is not me dissing Rob Liefeld, dissing that cover, dissing the artwork, or going after Deadpool. This is specifically about the statement that this is going to suddenly change everything for everybody involved in this industry. It will not. And as much as I want to be as positive as possible about something like this, that ain't going to happen. So just remember to be realistic with those expectations. And even a lot of the bigger names out there who are making these enormous claims, some of them who have really, really big characters that for some reason have never been adapted into movies or TV or whatever, for whatever reason, and as far as I know, aren't millionaires themselves. So comic books and everything that's been happening since, let's be honest, 1998 with Blade, but since the 2000s, and specifically 2008 when the boom hit, comic book creators aren't suddenly millionaires, right? The properties that are being licensed and being given millions and billions of dollars are the ones that are already worth that amount of money. The ones that were already bought up by Warner Brothers and Disney and stuff like that, right? You might see a couple of independents here and there get licensed, or you might see them get optioned, but those creators aren't necessarily rolling in money at this point. It's just the reality of it. So until next time, take it easy.